It's July 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, and I need you to understand that this is not a happy place to be. This is a city that has spent recent years getting comprehensively beaten up by reality. Harvests had failed. Bread prices had climbed to the point of cruelty. Disease was a regular houseguest. There was leprosy. There was syphilis. There was something contemporaries called the sweating sickness, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds. The poor were starving, the sick were dying, and the general mood in the city was less medieval market town and more everyone quietly waiting for the next disaster. So the emotional weather is set to bleak. Keep that in mind, because it matters more than anything else in this story. And then, on a summer day, a woman known to history as Frau Trophea stepped out into the street and began to dance. There was no music. There was no occasion. There was no reason. She simply began to dance in the road, alone, in front of everyone. And I imagine the initial reaction was the medieval equivalent of politely looking away and hoping she'd stop. She did not stop. She danced through the day. She danced into the evening. By some accounts, she kept going for the better part of a week, pausing only to collapse into brief, exhausted sleep before getting up and starting again, apparently unable to help it. Now, if one person dances in the street for a week, that's a private tragedy. That's a someone please check on her situation. But that is not what happened. What happened is that other people joined in. Within days, dozens of people were dancing alongside her. Within about a month, the contemporary accounts describe the number swelling into the hundreds. Hundreds of people dancing in the streets of Strasbourg, not out of joy, not at a festival, but as if compelled, sweating, staggering, faces reportedly showing not delight, but distress, and completely unable to stop. And here is the part that separates this from a fun historical anecdote and turns it into something genuinely unsettling. This was not fun. Eyewitnesses didn't describe a party. They described people dancing themselves into the ground, dancing until their feet were bloodied, dancing past exhaustion, dancing in the worst cases until their bodies simply gave out. People were reportedly collapsing from strokes, from heart attacks, from sheer physical ruin, and still the dancing spread to new participants faster than it was killing the old ones. So the city authorities had a crisis on their hands, and they had to decide what to do about it. And their solution is, for my money, one of the most spectacularly wrong first attempts at problem solving in recorded history. They decided the cure was more dancing. I want to give them a fair hearing, because their reasoning wasn't insane by the standards of their own medicine. The leading medical theory of the day held that this was caused by hot blood, an overheating of the body, and that the sensible remedy was to let the afflicted dance it out of their system until the fever of it passed. Get it out, sweat it loose, so the authorities didn't try to stop the dancing. They leaned in, they cleared spaces, they set up a stage, a market hall, an open area, and, this is the detail I need you to really sit with, they hired musicians. They brought in professional players to provide a beat so that the dancers could dance more efficiently. This is the part where, if this were a group project, you would gently take the pen away from whoever suggested it. Because of course it did not work. Encouraging a mass compulsion by supplying it with a soundtrack turned out to be roughly as effective as putting out a fire by fanning it and complimenting its enthusiasm. More people danced. The situation got worse. and it took the authorities an embarrassing amount of time to look at the crowd of collapsing, bleeding, involuntarily dancing citizens and conclude that maybe the live band had been a misstep. Eventually, they reversed course entirely. They banned the music, they banned public dancing, and in a very 16th century pivot, they decided the problem wasn't medical after all, but spiritual, and shipped the worst afflicted off to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, the saint associated conveniently with exactly this kind of affliction, to pray for deliverance. And whether through the prayer or the enforced rest, or simply the outbreak burning itself out the way these things tend to, the dancing gradually stopped. By around September, it was over. The city exhaled and went back to its regularly scheduled famine and disease. Now, at this point you might be assuming this was a one-off, a freak event, one cursed summer in one unlucky city, and that's the natural thing to assume. It's also wrong, which is the part that should bother you. Because Strasbourg wasn't the first time this happened. It was just the best documented time. Well over a century earlier, in 1374, something remarkably similar had swept through the towns along the Rhine, through Aachen, Cologne, and a string of other communities. Crowds of people seized by the same compulsion, dancing through the streets, apparently unable to stop. Different city, different generation, same baffling spectacle. And there are scattered reports of smaller outbreaks dotted across medieval and early modern Europe, besides, enough of them that the affliction had a name people already recognized. They called it Saint Vitus's dance, after the saint they blamed and prayed to for a cure. You do not get a widely understood name for a thing that has only happened once. The name itself is the evidence. This was a phenomenon people knew about, feared, and expected could come for their town next. Now, I'll be straight with you. These earlier outbreaks are murkier than 1518. We're working from chronicle mentions, rather than the physician's notes and city records that make Strasbourg so unusually well attested. So I won't pretend we can reconstruct 1374 in detail. But the pattern is clear enough, and the pattern is the point. This was not one town losing its mind on one occasion. This was something that happened again and again across centuries and borders, wherever the conditions were right. And that raises the obvious, uncomfortable question. What conditions? What could possibly make this happen, not once, but repeatedly, to ordinary people for hundreds of years? And this is where I have to be honest with you, because a good story deserves an honest ending. Nobody knows for certain, but the theories are worth walking through, because they tell you a lot. The first popular theory is poisoning, specifically ergot, a toxic mold that grows on damp rye and can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and burning sensations. It's a tidy explanation, and it's been floated for a lot of medieval weirdness. The problem is that ergot poisoning tends to cut off blood flow to the limbs and make coordinated movement difficult and agonizing, which is more or less the opposite of being able to dance continuously for days. So most historians have quietly shown ergot the door. The second theory, and the one that most scholars now lean toward, is that this was a case of mass psychogenic illness, mass hysteria. The idea is that under conditions of extreme prolonged stress, the famine, the disease, the grinding dread, the human mind can do genuinely strange things, and in a culture that already believed dancing curses were real and that Saint Vitus could strike you with exactly this affliction, That belief could become a kind of self-fulfilling trance. One person cracks under the pressure in a very public, very physical way, and in a population that is already at its breaking point and primed by its own superstitions to believe this can happen, it spreads, not by germs, but by suggestion, a contagion of the mind rather than the body, which is a far more disturbing explanation than any poison, because it means nothing external did this to them. The mold didn't do it, the water didn't do it, the stars didn't do it. Their own overloaded minds did it, feeding off each other in a feedback loop of fear made physical. So, let's get to the number, because you know that's why we're here. How many people died dancing in the streets of Strasbourg in the summer of 1518? The estimates vary because 16th century record-keeping was not exactly rigorous, but the accounts and the historians who've studied them land in a grim range. At its worst, the most dramatic contemporary reports claim that at the peak of the outbreak, something like 15 people a day were dying. The more sober modern estimates suggest the total dead across the whole episode likely numbered in the dozens, with the overall event involving as many as 400 dancers before it finally burned out. Dozens dead from dancing. Nobody attacked Strasbourg that summer. No army came. No plague swept through. No fire. No flood. No enemy at the gates. Dozens of people danced themselves to death in the street. And the deadliest force at work was the accumulated weight of fear, hunger, and dread pressing down on ordinary human minds until something snapped, and then snapped in the person next to them, and the person next to them. It wasn't a curse. It was a crowd of exhausted, terrified people, and a belief they all shared, and the terrible things a mind under enough pressure can talk a body into doing. Anyway, that was the dancing plague. I'll be here, not dancing.